Hello, everyone. I'm Tyler Mays-Childers, Product Marketing Manager for Azure Synapse, and I'm thrilled to welcome you all to our third Ask the Expert session for Azure Synapse influencers. We're very excited to be joined today by community all-stars Adam and Patrick from Guy in a Cube, and I hope I'm not blowing their covers by saying they actually work for Microsoft. They're going to be answering all of your questions on Synapse and Power BI integration. I'm also pleased to share that we're actually just now over 600 members, so woohoo, who have signed up for this Synapse Influencers program. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for your engagement, whether you're a contender, a challenger, a champion. We're really excited that you're here. If you're new to the program, don't forget to use the hashtag Synapse Influencers so that others can find your Synapse-related content. And if you haven't signed up to join the program already, how did you get past our bouncers? I mean, you need to go to aka.ms/Synapse Influencers. It's free to join, and just a few clicks and you'll be in. So moving on to the next slide here. Just a little bit of housekeeping here. First, ask your questions with the Q&A function in Teams. If you submitted a question during registration, we do have it, and we'll do our best to answer it in the hour we have today. Some questions we'll put out to answer live, and other questions we'll answer in the chat. Do try to stay on topic. If you ask questions that are not about Synapse and Power BI, or if you ask about, I don't know, Azure machine learning, we'll likely save it for a future Ask the Expert session.
Go Access.
Your team's name is shown whenever we answer your questions in chat, and we'll try to give you a shout out if we answer your question live, or you can ask questions anonymously if you like. We are recording the session, just FYI, and we're talking about how we can make these available later for folks who can't make it, because I know we are a global audience, so some of these are at times that not everyone can make. Last but certainly not least, I am personally very excited to share that we have some exclusive swag to give away today. And if you'd like to be one of the first to get your hands on this, ask the question in the Q&A window and then share your social details in the chat, and we'll send you a direct message with your redemption code. We might actually do it here, depends. I'm going to go to the next slide real quick and just say, Terrence is on the call, and he's like our swag redemption gatekeeper. I just made that title up, but he's gonna take care of you, get you a code to redeem, whether you're a contender or a challenger or a champion. Let us know your level too, because whatever we send you might have something to do with your level. And then make sure to follow us on Twitter so that we can message you. Some of you may have settings where we can't do that unless you're following us. If you don't have a Twitter account or your DMs are closed, you can also email us at synapseinfluencers@microsoft.com to ask for your code. So I'm now happy to welcome Adam and Patrick. They are the gurus behind Guy in a Cube. And I'm going to switch over to them. They're going to actually run a little video to give you a little taste of what they are all about.
Yo! What's up? I'm Adam.
And I'm Patrick.
And we are Guy in a Cube.
Where's the cube?
There used to be a cube. When this started, there was an actual cubicle where I did these videos out of, but we're both working from home now, and also with all the pandemic stuff that happened, we're just doing it from home. So it's this idea of we're just doing the work, Patrick.
One click at a time.
One click at a time. At Guy in a Cube, we are all about teaching you those clicks as it relates to Power BI and the Microsoft data platform as a whole. So if we're going to be digging into things, obviously with Power BI, that's where we've been doing stuff for a long time, but also introducing some other things like Azure Synapse Analytics and maybe some other data related items to help get the data you need for your reporting and business needs.
So we're going to talk all up about analytics now. I'm so excited.
So what are you going to find here in Guy in a Cube? Tuesdays, we are going to have Azure Synapse Analytics videos or other videos around data. So the primary focus will be Azure Synapse Analytics, but we'll introduce other concepts there as well. So basically Tuesdays are your data days. Wednesdays and Thursdays, Patrick, that's where we teach the clicks of Power BI. We've been doing Wednesday, Thursdays for a long time. That's not going to change. Those are still going to be Power BI videos coming at you. And then Saturdays, Patrick, we've been doing this live stream thing on Saturdays, 9:30 a.m. Central Time for over 2 years now. The live streams are just there to help answer your questions about Power BI and just bring the community together, both from a Guy in a Cube perspective and from a Power BI perspective. All right, Patrick, as you said here on Guy in a Cube, it's all about learning the clicks and having some fun. Maybe a little dancing too. All right, so be sure to subscribe to get all the greatest content and the latest stuff from Guy in a Cube so you don't miss a thing. Also, be sure to participate in the comments and just keep that conversation going and just help each other out as part of the community. Thank you so much for watching. Keep being awesome, and we'll see you in the next video.
Thanks so much, guys. It sounds like you're actually have way more experience with doing these live Q&As than I do.
A little bit. A little bit. A little bit.
I'm going to start you off with a bit of a softball question here, but basically, I know you have so much more history in Power BI. You are the Power BI experts, so your Synapse journey is a little bit younger, we'll say. What really excited you when you started looking at Synapse? And maybe we'll start with Patrick.
Oh shoot! Just slow down. Just slow down. So, you know what? To be honest, Tyler, when I started tinkering with it, I was surprised because there's so many different options or different things I can do, and I was afraid that I was going to have to go and learn something else. But I mean, SQL's the foundation of it, and I can write SQL. But I wanted to do some Spark. I wanted to learn Data Explorer, but I could write SQL there too. So one of my favorite things is the flexibility that's there, right? You can choose your own path, choose your own journey. It just got me really excited.
Sweet.
Yeah. On my end, it's the same. Like SQL's been there since the beginning. So I've been working with SQL for a long time, and then also started with SQL Server reporting services and analysis services, all the on-prem stuff. I guess that makes us old, Patrick. So no, I like SQL. Like Synapse brings it's all of that SQL stuff, working at scale of data, which we work at with the largest customers with Power BI, and so bringing those two together, that's like a marriage made in heaven. So I love that it's all coming together.
Yeah, I'm still concerned about this old thing, man. I'm not old. I'm just mature. Mature. You're much older than me. You're much older than me.
Not old. So. I'm wise. Is that what it is?
All right, whatever you want to say.
Sweet. Thanks, guys. Our first question from our influencers is from Adrian. And Adrian asks, how do we set up secured network connections between Power BI and Synapse? And then part two
sounds like a Patrick question.
Part two is how do we limit access to dedicated SQL pools in Power BI?
You want me to go, Patrick? So in terms of network isolation, and we think of network security and access and connectivity, where Synapse is really going to help you there, Azure in general, there's this concept of VNets. And typically what we see with enterprise organizations is you're going to stick your Azure Synapse dedicated pool or serverless option, you're going to stick that in a VNet, right? So you're going to isolate it from a network perspective. So what does that mean for Power BI? At that point, Power BI can't talk to Synapse, just like nothing can talk to Synapse unless you're in that VNet, right? And so you've got a couple options there. One is you can use what's referred to as the on-premises data gateway. And so if you spin up a VM and that's in the same VNet as Azure Synapse Analytics, then the gateway will be able to communicate to the Synapse instance. Your other option from a Power BI perspective is if you're using Power BI Premium, you can use what we call the VNet gateway. So this is relatively a newer option from a Power BI offering. It's specific to Premium. So if you're not using Premium, the on-premises data gateway is your only option in that case. But if you're using the VNet gateway and you're using a supported data source, of which Synapse and Azure SQL Database are a part of that, then we can use that to inject Power BI into your VNet. In order to, or the Premium, that instance, that VNet gateway will be a part of the VNet at that point, and then it can communicate to Synapse at that point. So it's all about network connectivity. Can it talk to Synapse? And when it's in a VNet, no one can talk to it unless you've explicitly given network access. And so it's all about how do we enable that, and that's where the gateways come in.
See, my camera got stuck. What was the second one? What was the second part of that question, Tyler? There was the second part.
How do we limit access to dedicated SQL pools with Power BI?
Well, I mean, it's not about, Power BI is not going to limit access to your data source. I mean, you could do things like row level security and stuff to control the data they have access to. But from a Power BI perspective, you can't limit access to a dedicated SQL pool. That would all be done in the dedicated SQL pool.
I'm gonna add a different take on that. So when we think about limiting access to Synapse from Power BI, I'm like, well, how would you limit anything coming into Synapse, right? So that goes to Patrick's point of you need to look at security on the database side of it. So that's where VNet comes in. That's where access control comes in. You can implement certain things on the Synapse side, same as you can also do that with Azure SQL Database. So on your data source itself, you need to make sure that you're implementing proper security and governance at that layer. And then from a Power BI perspective, you have access controls on the Power BI side as well. They're not necessarily linked together because they're separate entities. So you need to be mindful about that from a governance and security approach. And so you have controls for access to a given workspace inside of Power BI. You also have access controls to a published app for a large distribution. The other aspect you have from a gateway perspective is if you define data sources that can connect to Synapse, you can also define who are the ones that can actually use that. And so there's many different areas and levels where you can imply or apply security from a governance perspective.
Sweet. Thanks. We got another question coming in here from, I think this is Seth. And I think just how should Seth think about how Synapse essentially changes how he currently develops Power BI reports?
So it depends.
It depends. You're going to hear that a lot, by the way. It depends is a trademark item from Guy in a Cube. So
and I hate to say it, but it absolutely depends. And so depending on, one of the big factors is that, when people start talking about Synapse, well, Power BI is, what's the latency requirement? My video keeps freezing. This is what I'm talking about. What's the latency requirement of the data? That's where I honestly start, because if we don't care about latency, if it's not real time, nothing's changing, because I'm just importing the data. I'm just pulling the data from Power BI, importing it, putting it in the cache. And if you're just updating that data warehouse nightly, doesn't matter, right? But if we're talking about the latency and we want to have real-time access to that data, then you need to really think about it, because if I'm going direct query mode, there's layers that's involved. And I remember the first time I heard Adam talk about this, like, what are you talking about layers? But there's layers involved because we need to think about performance. We need to think about, hey, how fast do I need to pull that data back? How much data am I pulling back from Synapse? And so that's where the layers will come in at. Maybe I start with doing aggregations in Power BI, and then I do have to start refreshing my cache. But if I don't want to do that, then I can think about materialized views. And I did a video a while ago on materialized views in Synapse. That's where the layers coming in at, because now I need to think about, do I want to cache any data in Power BI? Do I want to keep all my data in Synapse? Then that's where Synapse is going to change the game, because Synapse can scale, it can perform, especially with those materialized views. I can leave all my data in one place, not replicate data in the Power BI, go direct query mode, and things can be really snappy. So that's where I would leave that at.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yep.
Here's another question we just got in from an anonymous person. Can I access the data lake in direct query mode?
So yes.
Well, yes. I was you're shaking your head no, and I'm like, no, you can do that.
Yeah, you can. If you go serverless with Synapse, you can do it. Now, I will tell you this. Adam and I were talking about serverless just a minute ago. If you're going to go serverless, there's a cost every time you're running queries against your serverless pool. So you got to think about how much that's going to cost you if you go in direct query mode. So you need to be careful with that and be, conscious of how many queries, because direct query can be really chatty. And I like, whenever we have this session, we do what the French toast is Power BI doing in my database. And so it can send one visual can send one or more queries back to your source. And then you need to think about the volume of data that's coming back for each one of those queries, because I forget the actual cost. We looked it up today. I forget what the actual cost is. Per terabyte or per 5 terabytes.
It was like $5 per terabyte. Like the size, the data size itself was small.
Yeah, but you need to be careful. And so if you're going to go direct query against data lake through serverless, you just need to be conscious that it could cost you some money if you're moving large volumes of data. My recommendation is if you're going to go, serverless, you probably should look at a more of a import mode or a composite model, at least with some aggregations to minimize the number of queries that's going back to that serverless pool.
Awesome. We have a question just came in from Michael, I believe. What are the biggest limitations when using a serverless SQL pool, compared to a dedicated SQL pool? Do these limitations, in your opinion, make a serverless SQL pool unsuitable for populating enterprise-wide certified Power BI data sets?
No, honestly, if you're building an enterprise model and that data is populated at a lower frequency, nightly or twice a day, I probably would completely go serverless, because now I'm just using Power BI to pull that data from my serverless pool and cache it up. And so I'm not issuing too many queries to pull that data. And if you really want to be, if you really want to do this really elegantly, you can implement incremental refresh, so you reduce the amount of data, therefore reducing, the cost that's associated with importing that data to Power BI. So if it was up to me, no, it's absolutely not. Now, the limitation is, one of the biggest limitations is, if you're trying to go direct query mode, you can't create those materialized views to optimize the performance of the report. So that's a big challenge that you could run into, but absolutely not. I think serverless is a great way to go.
Awesome.
And I would say you need to think about, though, you really need to think about the solution all up. And this is one of the big things I see with Synapse plus Power BI, is a lot of times you get folks that come in and they think about one of the aspects and not both together. The thing I've heard before, Arun Ulag, who is the VP for both Synapse and Power BI, I've heard him say this in meetings before, and I love it, is you need to think about the best of both sides of this and bring those feature sets together to get the most benefit out of the solution, right? So it's not just Synapse, it's not just Power BI, it's your overall data solution that you're leveraging both for. So think about those features on the Power BI side that help you enable better strategies with Synapse, and vice versa. So when we think about materialized views on dedicated pools, when we think about other things on that space on the Synapse side that can help, and then when we think about aggregations, hybrid tables, incremental refresh, those are all things that balance the solution to get you to scale. And Patrick and I do this with our large enterprise customers. So all these big brands you see out there, we're talking with them and we're telling them how to implement this stuff, and we're seeing it successful in deployment. So you need to think about both, not just one outside of the other.
Cool. Thank you.
That's good. That's good.
We have an anonymous question in. How is data from Synapse DW transferred to Power BI?
The same way it's transferred with Excel or CSV files or SharePoint. So I'm jesting a little bit, but so effectively anything that's coming in from Power BI's perspective, we start with what we love and what we call Power Query to help kind of connect to the data and transform it, and then it comes into Power BI's data model, whether it's in direct query mode or inside of an imported data set. But this connectivity that we do on the Power BI side, it's just like if you have an application that's connecting to Synapse or Azure SQL database or an Excel file or something like that, there's a connector there that you're using to do that. And so in our case, it's a Power Query connector from a Power BI perspective. And those Power Query connectors are actually used across multiple services, not just Power BI. So these are leveraged inside of Azure Data Factory. They're leveraged inside of Power Apps and Power Automate across the Power Platform. They're leveraged in Azure Analysis Services, inside of Azure Logic Apps. So these are connectors that are becoming more and more synonymous with Azure and Microsoft. And these connectors allow connectivity to the data source itself. At the end of the day, though, let's get techie a little bit. It's going to actually talk to Synapse via how we've always done it, right? It's a TDS protocol. It's going to establish that connection, and then we're going to pull that in. It's the old, like, on-premises port 1433. I don't know if it actually does that with Synapse nowadays in the big cloud world, but it's the same concept, right? We're just making a connection to a SQL server. And in fact, when you go into Power BI, you can choose Azure Synapse Analytics, but you could also just choose SQL Server, right? Because it's the same protocols used for all of those. And then we're going to connect, and then we're going to issue T-SQL queries to get the data. And that's all it is. It's easy. So if you know SQL, you're good to go. That's what is also awesome about Synapse is you're ready.
Just double clicking on that just a little bit. Do you have any best practices or optimization tips for these sorts of connections?
How much time do we have? This is the get us started.
At the foundation of it, though, any relational source, or honestly connecting, if you're using Power BI, I don't care if it's Synapse or SQL or whatever the source is, you need a star schema. Right? Let's just start right there. Now we can talk about all the other things, but you need some dimensions and facts. Don't come to Power BI with one big fact table with lots of strings and things like that. Don't do it. And then when you design your star schema out, your fact table should be as narrow as possible. And I'm not talking about from the aspect of the number of columns, but the data types. So in your fact table, you can have billions of rows. I don't care, right? We can handle it because we're going to compress it down, but you need to make sure you're using dates or integers or decimals with less than 4 decimal numbers with less than 4 places on it, because all those are integers under the cover, and we can compress that down to almost nothing. And then have your dimensions, all those large strings, have those in the dimension tables that surround it, instead of just one wide table, because that wide table, there's challenges and things like that. And another thing is you have a date table in your database, right? Don't use the auto date time in Power BI. Use a date table in it, and we can keep going. Don't use extreme dates. We can keep going. Avoid high cardinality columns. We can keep going. There's so many things that we could talk about here, but I'm
going to shorten it for Patrick.
All right.
Keep it clean. Keep it simple.
Yeah.
So, story time. I've got a customer that is working with large amounts of data. Now, they've got a couple different things that they're doing, but importing data wise, like they were sitting at 1.2 billion rows imported, coming off of we're pulling data in. We're working with that. They got it to be really small, really fast. And then working with a larger model, talking about the layers that we talked about, we're getting up in the number of rows. We're talking scale. And using those approaches, we're leveraging, we had performance at the different layers because we were smart about that, and that, aggregations, incremental refresh on certain things, doing certain things making sure that we've got a clean star schema in place, because that's what Power BI likes. And it's blazing fast. And so implementing these concepts, keep it clean, keep it simple, right? Don't bring in stuff you don't need, and make sure that it's performing and modeled in the right way. You're going to go far with this. The minute you diverge from that, you're adding complexity, and you're going to add, so if you just have one giant table that's like 800 columns, and some may chuckle with that, we've seen it, it doesn't perform well, and that's expected. So those are things to consider. So one thing I'm showing is the doc here from the Power BI guidance documentation. So what is a star schema, and how to normalize versus denormalize, and how to look at this from a Power BI perspective. So these are docs that are out there that you can go look at. It's definitely a great source of information. That's all generated by the Power BI CAT team, which is the team that Patrick and I are on. So that's from the source of the people that deal with all these large engagements.
Sweet. I think someone's going to put that in the chat for
awesome.
In the Q&A.
Yep.
I'd love to go back just real quick. Adam, you mentioned that you work with our large customers to implement these kind of solutions. I would love to know, what's a really cool solution that you've seen a customer do with, you don't have to name names, with Synapse and Power BI.
Ooh. Basically the solutions we're talking about when it comes to, we've worked with customers in the retail space when we're looking at actual sales volumes. So that's a very prominent one. We've got a lot of sales, retail customers that are using Synapse to do that. I can think of 2 big brands off of the top of my head right now that we're engaged with that are doing that. So others are looking at things of like supply chain type information, and also like store, like inventory. Like, what is the inventory? And all that data is being served up by Synapse through Power BI. And also looking at, some of the creative things we've seen on the Power BI space, when we think about the data in space thing with the mobile app and looking at that from an inventory, like people in the store checking things, that's all being driven from that data. Those are things that are actually, that's not just, hocus pocus, right? Those are real scenarios that are being looked at seriously by large retail customers. So I see a lot of information also in that space for many different industries. All of it is some of it's around some of the telemetry related items. So I see a lot of IoT integrations, and how do we bring those things together also when we've got data stored, like data warehousing, traditional data from that may be in Synapse, but also how do we leverage like streaming data on top of that and getting into creative solutions as well. So there's lots of different industries that are looking at that as well. When we look at manufacturing, when we look at oil and gas, a lot of those different ones. So I don't know if that answers your question.
That is great.
Okay.
I have a question that just came in. What does Synapse bring to the table when it comes to Power BI development?
It's another...
and I don't know if this is really an evolution or kind of another way to ask this is, we just had a big, splash with data marts, and when should somebody use what's already there with data marts versus go and bring in, a much more complex ecosystem with Synapse?
I think it goes back to what Adam was saying earlier, though. So what Arun talks about, you got to look at the big picture, And so if you're already using Synapse and it's already in place, do I really need data marts? If you're starting a new project up, if it's a brand new project, let's kind of take a look at the entire ecosystem. Let's take a look at the problem that we're trying to solve. Maybe data marts is a great solution. I mean, there's some great places that data marts fit in to this, and maybe I'm not going after the entire Synapse data warehouse or all the data in Synapse, and I just need a subset of it. Maybe I use data marts as a middle layer. Instead of going directly to Synapse, maybe data marts is a middle layer that allows me to do some additional things like row level security and incremental refresh all built into it. Now I have a new endpoint as opposed to giving people direct access to that SQL server to Synapse. Now I give them access to a smaller subset of data where they can add row level security to that smaller subset of data. And now they have a new endpoint that they connect to with SQL that they can use with Excel or other third-party tools or Power BI. And they have another data set that sits there. So, it just depends. I hate this "it depends" word, this phrase.
You need a T-shirt.
I know, but it's so
I'm working
common,
on
it. And if Synapse works right now, and why introduce data marts? But if you're going down this path where data marts fits into the solution or it helps answer the problem, hey, let's take a look at data marts.
And I've also, so I've been working with some customers too, where they were looking at data marts specifically of like, look, I can use that as almost like a staging interval before I bring it into my, just what Patrick was talking about, like get that smaller subset for what's relevant, and leave the bigger piece in Synapse itself. So. Yeah.
Almost like a proof of concept, or just like you're trying to figure out.
No, they're actually doing it for a production scenario, but what they're doing is a true, like, look, I'm actually pulling it in as a data mart out of the larger data warehouse as a staging ground. So I'm not like hitting Synapse all the time with the big queries that Power BI may be pushing to get that data, right? I can stage it in data marts and then pull it in from there into my larger data model.
Nice. Yeah. Cool. We have.
It's a good question here.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We have an anonymous question saying, we are in the process of setting Azure Synapse Analytics and we have Azure Analysis Services also. What's the future of Azure Analysis Services against Synapse, and should we invest in AAS or Azure Synapse Analytics?
So
don't say it depends.
I'm not going to say it depends. I'm going to say if you are starting. Right?
Share my tab, Tyler.
If you are starting Power BI, and so there you go, right? Power BI is a superset of analysis services. So if you look at the things that Azure Analysis Services can do, it can't do all the wonderful things, all the innovative things that Power BI can do, and it'll never do those things. I'm not saying that it's going away. I'm not saying that it's being deprecated. That Patrick is not saying those things. What I'm saying is that Power BI is a superset, and it's going to offer you look at that. Stop right there. Stop right there. It's going to offer you so much more capabilities, and a lot of the capabilities, there's a big capability that's not in Power BI. I'm not going to say any names, but it's coming. And so there's so many things that Power BI is going to be able to do that Azure Analysis Services is not going to do. So if it's me, I'm going Power BI Premium first. That's where I'm starting, because Power BI Premium offers the XMLA endpoint. So now I can connect to Power BI Premium just like Analysis Services. I can think of a couple of customers that are using Power BI just like Analysis Services. So they're using it as a backend and not using the visualization layer. They're just using it as a semantic layer, and they're not using it, for anything else. And so starting a new project, let me take a look at Power BI, because there's some advanced capabilities there that makes your life so much easier than what Analysis Services would bring.
Now, the other thing I'll add to that, though, and we've heard this question a lot too, is like, oh, well, recently we've heard it on the data Marts side of it, but we've also heard it with Azure Analysis Services and Power BI as well. It's like, oh, well, if you're saying Power BI is the superset, I should rebuild everything into Power BI and not have it in Azure Analysis Service. I'm like, if it's working, like, and you're in production and there's nothing that you're really needing on the Power BI side, maybe leave it. Although I would say, as opposed to data Marts, going from Azure Analysis Services to Power BI it's pretty straightforward. And there's some things we just released in terms of migration, automated migration, things of that nature, that are going to help on that front. But we've got the XMLA endpoint. You could potentially redeploy. There may be some fix-up things that need to be done, but ultimately, like, I would potentially leave it in Azure Analysis Services, and or look at the migration stuff if you want to go that direction. There are a lot of capabilities on the Power BI side, though, so you should definitely look at that now.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Cool. We are about halfway through. I just want to take a quick pause and remind everybody that we have swag to give away. I believe we're even giving some to Adam and Patrick here. The shirt does not say it depends. It's Synapse Influencer Swag. All you got to do is put a Q&A into the Q&A with your handle and your participation level in the program, contender, challenger, or champion, and Terrence will get you hooked up. So don't forget to do that. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to switch gears now to a little bit of the security and governance side. We got a question in from Alex, who asks, how can Purview be used to scan assets across both platforms?
Yeah, so it's the same. It honestly is the same. So if you use Purview, you're going to connect to your Power BI tenant, and if you use Synapse, you're going to connect to the Synapse workspace, and then it'll scan all the metadata for them. You can run a scan, you can run incremental scans, but it'll give you the lineage directly in Purview. Or if you go to the Synapse Studio, you can actually switch to a Purview view where you can see the lineage directly in Synapse Studio. So, I mean, they behave the same way. You just got to set it up, and I guess you pay a little more money when you run those scans.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask for just like an elevator. What is Purview? For those of you on the call who are like, what is Purview?
So
I want to say I'm gonna say the wrong answer first. It's not the wrong answer, but it's like the half answer, right? Data cataloging. Right.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
data cataloging, scanning, inventorying of data for data governance and discoverability. That I would say that was the original concept. So if you think of Azure Data Catalog and then it transformed into Azure Purview, it's so much more than that now, though, right? So you can do more than that. But I think the easiest way to grasp it is data cataloging. I do know also that there was a rebranding. So a lot of our different DLP type products and whatnot. So when we think of like information protection label, all of that got rolled up into the Purview brand. And so that's why I say it's more than data cataloging now. It's also about governance. It's about reliability. It's about cataloging, inventorying, making sure, when we think about things like data exfiltration, policies, things of that nature, there's a lot to it. So if you're in like the DLP space, if you're into governance, if you're into those cataloging and policy-based type of things from security and whatnot, Purview is definitely something you should be looking at.
It's like a good way to get an overview of your entire data estate, to manage it, to protect it, so I can collect all that information and look at it in a central place. And so
the other benefit there, and this is where we start looking at the Microsoft stack, right?
Yeah.
These are the different Legos that you have available to you. You can use these Legos independently, but they are really cool when you stack them together, right? And so when we think about Purview, when we think about Synapse, when we think about Power BI, and then the other Azure assets that you may have, or the Office 365 capabilities, right? So when we start thinking about SharePoint, when we think about OneDrive, all of these things kind of play in together. So I mentioned the information protection labels inside of Purview now. When you look at Excel and you get one of those docs that say, hey, this is highly classified, that label goes throughout the entire Microsoft estate. So that can be leveraged inside of Power BI, inside of Synapse, inside of Office, right? So all of these things start coming together when you start bringing those services to bear.
Truly horizontal. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Along the same, kind of in the same arena, we did have someone ask, are there any security considerations with Synapse and Power BI?
Always. Well, I should say you should always be considering security. So I mean, there are capabilities. I think we touched on this in the beginning a little bit of, make sure that you're mindful of your security and governance standpoint at your data layer, right? From a Synapse perspective. There's also different security aspects that you can employ on the Power BI aspect of this. So you definitely want to be aware of what those are, make sure that you're reviewing those from a security and governance perspective. We also there's security white papers that are available as well, so you can make sure you're going through those items and understanding that, whether it's Power BI or whether it's on the Synapse side or Azure in general. So when we think about, and there's different layers of this too, right? So there's data security, there's network security, there's access control. So all of these things need to play in, and whether you're leveraging, do we want single sign-on from an Azure Active Directory perspective and leveraging those things? Are we using other IDP type providers coming in from an authentication standpoint? Sorry, I can go on and on about this all day. So yes, there are different aspects of those that you want to pay attention to. Sorry, I'm
like, is he ever going to stop?
I'm going to start talking about Kerberos in the sense of the cloud too, even though it's not really there. But I love Kerberos. It just works.
This is going to go on forever. This is going to go on forever.
So yeah, absolutely. Security is as good as you are at reviewing and implementing it. Right. Yeah. So you need to pay attention to it. And if a lot of the things I hear in the news or other things, it's where, there was a gap, like someone missed something. And then most organizations have a security group inside of them where they're reviewing those things too. And there are things you can do to even get different security information from Microsoft as an enterprise customer where you can request some of that information. So those are things we'll work with you on.
It's in the cloud. It just works. You don't have to worry about it. It's in the cloud. It just works.
Cool. Awesome. I have a question too here about ingesting and visualizing your data fully within Synapse versus doing it in Power BI. When should you do which?
Why would you do that?
If you truly want to visualize your data at an enterprise level, you should use Power BI. Now, you can bring your Power BI reports to the Synapse Studio, right? You could bring it there within the workspace if you want to, but distributing it is a different question, So if you want to do some enterprise level visualization and analytics, you do that in Power BI. If you're doing this ad hoc for yourself, for some self-service analysis of the data, you can use notebooks inside of Power BI. You can use PySpark. You can visualize the data lots of different ways. Even when you run a query in the studio, you can visualize the data. But if you're trying to go across your organization, you go Power BI. I wouldn't look at Synapse as my layer for visualization.
It's that persona question, right? So as a developer, sure, you can do it either way. What's quickest for you to get what you need, right? Yep. What makes sense there? But when you're talking about consumption and distribution at large scale, you're not going to do that on the Synapse side. That doesn't make sense.
I did a video with Spia from the ADX team, and we were, doing visuals right there in the notebook when we were writing our KQL query. So you could do it, but how am I distributing it? How am I showing it to Tyler and Adam? You know, they got
for those that don't know, ADX is Azure Data Explorer.
Yes, Azure Data Explorer.
We have a lot of acronyms
yes.
at Microsoft.
Yeah.
Hello.
So, hi, Tyler.
Did we lose Tyler? I can hear you.
I can hear him.
Uh-oh.
It's all right.
Okay. Question. There's a question.
Yeah, we got a question. Hang on. We're gonna be Tyler here for a minute.
Yeah. Go for
it. Which one was it? Where was it? Oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong tab. Do you have it?
Yeah, I'm going to read this and maybe you can answer this. I'll go ahead and read it. I'm going to be Tyler here for a second. Okay.
All right.
So we got a question from Camille in the chat. So I'm going to read it. Does Microsoft plan change in mounting storage points in Synapse? Currently, we can do that only for job ID scope rather than whole cluster scope. There you go. That's all you, buddy.
I have no idea.
We don't know. So Tyler said at the beginning, we're just starting our journey with Synapse. And the good thing about Adam and I is we're okay with saying, I don't know. But guess what? I got that question in the chat and I'll go look it up and we'll find out for you. Yeah. So we got a question from Anonymous here, Adam. So
all right.
I'm just getting started with Synapse. Any tips for a newbie? That's a good question. That's a great question.
Check out the videos that we posted.
Yes, absolutely. I would go start there. We got a getting started with Synapse. Adam and I did an intro video, and then I did a follow-up video about what is Synapse and all the different pieces. How do you spin up? How do you get to the studio and things like that? How do you create your first workspace? That's actually where I would start. But then, like I said earlier, then you got to pick your journey because there's so much you can do. You can do data integration. You can create. You can write. You can do Spark. You can do dedicated SQL pools. You can do Azure Data Explorer. So then you get to choose your journey, and there's lots of documentation. The other thing
I'm going to point you to also is go to the documentation area. Right, there's a lot of there's quick starts there that you can start your journey and explore some things. We've also got go to Microsoft Learn. There's information out there to help you get started. So there's lots of content out there. I would also say check out the community in general. There's a lot of people in the community. This is true on the Synapse side. It's true on the Power BI side. There's videos. So I like Simon Whiteley is someone coming to my head. He does a lot of YouTube videos around Synapse and other things as well on YouTube. There's blogs out there from a lot of people. So there's lots of community around you to help you in that journey as well. So go to the docs, check out the docs, check out our videos to help you get started, and then check out other community members as well.
Tyler, did you like how we just kept that going? Do you like that?
That was awesome. Yes, thank you. We're in a heat wave here in the Pacific Northwest, so it's I think maybe the combination of aircon and
I don't know anything about heat in Texas.
Well, we're not used to anything over 90 up here, right?
Yeah. We have air conditioning. Sorry for all our Europe friends that may be watching.
Cool. We have a question from Camille. Does anybody want to?
I think we already asked that.
We already asked that.
We did that one.
Yeah, we did that one.
Storage.
Yeah, we did the storage one.
Yeah, we did the storage one.
We said we don't know.
All right.
But we're going to find out.
Okay. Yeah. Near Edge Doobie asks, with the deprecation of DES in November 20 of this year, we are setting Azure Synapse Link to get the data from Dataverse into Data Lake storage. We have a lot of pushback in setting up ASL as append mode. What risk?
Yeah, that's fine.
What risk we have in setting up ASL in append mode as compared to in place updated?
I can't answer that specifically about Azure Azure Data Lake storage. That's what that is.
But right? A pin to update. So if you do a pin, this is if you think about just a regular database, right? If I do a pin, it's just adding data and it's keeping the history. But if I do in place updated, right, it's going to update that row and I lose the history. And so I'm just going off of basic database knowledge here. My guess is you would risk losing history. Now, I got to go do some research on this to give you the definitive answer, but if I had to guess, that's what it would be. You may lose history if you're not just a pendant, because I'm guessing a pendant keeps all the history of all the records and everything like that. So.
Yep. I will say what little I actually do cover in my day job, Azure Synapse Link and Dataverse. It's already included with your Dataverse subscription or your license. So
I was
your
gonna be
data
like, why
is
are we
already available over in Synapse.
Yeah.
Now, so one thing I'm going to ask the noob question here. The question said ASL.
I think that's Azure Synapse Link.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
you said it earlier.
Because I'm starting to think
Yeah.
like, okay.
That's
All
what
right,
I thought. That's what I thought. That's what I thought.
Yeah. Yep.
Just clarifying, we got a lot of acronyms. I'm like, wait, do they mean like ADSL or ADLS?
I
or
thought
like
it was
what?
Azure Synapse Link.
All right.
Azure Synapse
Throwing out
Link.
DES and ASL and
Scott threw that
ABC.
acronym out at me one day. So Scott on our team.
All righty. I'm gonna fanboy a little bit here for you and just ask if what's your favorite video that you've made?
Ooh. Ooh.
And can you point us to it so we can all watch it?
My favorite video.
It depends. I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna position this. So the thing I love, whether we're talking about Power BI, whether we're talking about Synapse, Microsoft as a whole, we're talking Guy in a Cube, and kind of where my roots are and where I've come up is community, right? So my favorite video that I've done is, and I will put this in the, well, maybe I will, hang on. The favorite video I've done is actually a community video I did about attending SQL Bits. This was a video that I did. I've had two loves in my life outside of my family. I've had video production and I've had Power BI, and I've been blessed that I can bring those together and now bring Synapse into that as well. And so this video though, I had planned in my head 6 months before from a production perspective, and thought about it, and then I executed on it. It came together. I was still like kind of early days on this. But I was really proud of it. It involved the community. I got the community involved in the video. I had a lot of fun with it. So that was my favorite video that I did for multiple reasons.
Back in the olden days.
Yeah. When we could go to conferences.
It'll be back. It'll be back.
I went to Bits this year. I was in London in February.
You didn't
March.
take your camera though.
I did not. No. I'll leave it. That's why I didn't take it. I'll leave it.
Yeah.
All right, Patrick.
It's a non-technical video. To be honest with you, it's a non-technical video. Adam and I talked about this, and it's about speaking. It's about we did 5 tips to be a better public speaker, because I go to a lot. Well, I used to go to a lot of conferences and sit in the back of the room, and I mean, I enjoy a good presentation. I love a great, and I mean, I look forward to them, but sometimes our egos get in the way of us delivering really good content. And when we talked about this, I was really excited about doing this video, because I mean, like right now, I'm doing this because I enjoy to do this, not for, any kind of kudos or credibility or anything like that. I care less about that. This is fun. This is like, I'm like on a high right now. When I get on the stage, it's amazing. I'm sharing my knowledge. I'm giving my knowledge. And sometimes people get up and, I'm the smartest guy in the room. I just threw up in my mouth. I hate those kind of people. And so I just share, if you want to be a good speaker, not that I'm this expert, best speaker in the world, but these are just some tips I've learned from other people, right? They've given me this feedback, and I took that feedback and I put this video together. And if you watch it, you can see how excited I am. But what I really like about this video is what our video editors did in this video. So anyway, it's my favorite one. It's right as of today, it's my favorite video. So.
That's so useful, no matter where you are, what role you're in, being able to communicate and make sense to people so they can go away with learning something, We have a question about, will we see tighter integration and alignment between the tools in the future? And I know I got to tread a little lightly on this, but I think I double click here on this kind of what about proper data warehouses. It seems that the organizations using Synapse today are the same who did BI and built data warehouses 10 years ago. So what is the new, I guess, cutting edge data warehouse plus Power BI implementation you see going forward?
So from a technology standpoint, it's what we have today. It's kind of the Legos that we've had for a long time and putting them together. The thing I've been hearing more about, and we're kind of digging in more to understand it and contribute and things of that nature, is this whole data mesh type architecture and how to deploy and how to work with data and how our existing technologies can contribute to that type of approach. So that's the thing that's kind of the buzzword right now that I'm hearing is data mesh and how we can leverage and do those things. To the broader question of how Synapse and Power BI are going to, be more integrated in the future. The one thing I'll tell you is if we think at just Power BI itself, Power BI just had its birthday. What is it, 6 or 7 years old now?
Oh, yeah.
And so if we think about Power BI 6, 7 years ago, Power BI is still kind of new, right? It's 6, 7 years old. Like that's nothing from a tech perspective. And some of these older technologies like SQL that's been around forever and analysis services over 20 years, right? So, but the amount of innovation and iteration on features and capabilities inside of Power BI has been amazing year over year. Doing Power BI desktop releases every month, service updates every week. And so are we going to see more integration between Synapse and Power BI? Absolutely, where it makes sense, right?
Of course.
Those are things as the teams integrate and implement those things and where it makes sense to bring those two together, there's always going to be opportunities there. And so I can't tell you when or what or anything like that, but obviously the answer to that is yes, right? And Microsoft does that all up. If we think about some of the integrations we've had in Power BI with the information protection labels, for example, or some of the DLP technologies, those are things that we're integrating more with the Azure stack and Office. We've integrated more with like Azure Key Vault and Azure Data Lake Storage. And so will we integrate more with Azure Synapse? Absolutely, where it makes sense.
Absolutely.
I don't have any magic answer for you in terms of details on that, but yes, of course it's going to.
You mentioned data mesh. If I was just like an on-prem DBA who has been living under a rock still working on SQL Server 2008, what is data mesh?
Go for it, Patrick. You brought it up. No, think about. We used to build these big monolithic data warehouses. We used to build, I still build them today. I still, build these huge central repositories of data that I think I can answer every department's or every segment's, questions from this huge monolithic data warehouse. Well, now I'm not going to call them silos, but now you have these departments or these groups within the organizations that can build these smaller, data repositories. Let's not call them silos because they're not silos, right? It's really specific. Because a silo is multiple copies of the exact same thing, right? We're talking about, Tyler works in HR. He's building this thing for HR. Adam works in sales. He's building this thing for sales. Patrick works in engineering. But then we can mesh them all together, right? Hence the data mesh. So we can connect them all up, and I can use some of Tyler's stuff and Adam can use some of, my stuff, and we can, connect all these things together. And if you're an old school guy like me I started SQL Server back 7.0.6.5, don't be afraid of this, right? You got to adopt these things. You can do these on premises if you're still running SQL Server 2008, like Tyler says. You still can do these things. You can. You just got to be a really good DBA and architect it out that way. Should you do it on premises? No. Use a data lake and put all that data in the lake, right? So anyway.
Hey, I just have a personal love for SQL Server 2008 because that is when reporting services was re-architected and we detached from Internet Information Server. And if you know more details IIS about that, I'm happy to go into it.
No more IIS, right? No more IIS, right?
Nice. All righty. I know we're coming up on the top of the hour. One more plug for swag. If you have not yet sent in a little note to Terrence with your social handle that you signed up with and your level, contender, challenger, or champion, we will, if you do that, we'll send you a little form for you to fill out and you'll be able to get your swag sent to you. Just one little note about that, the It's our swag warehouse, not our data warehouse. We'll have to come up with some name for it. Anyway, it's getting stood up on August 5th, so we got a little while before the ship's
swag
going
lake.
out.
The swag
swag
lake. That's it. Our swag lake is coming August 5th, so there'll be a little bit of delay, but then they'll be getting shipped out, and you'll see that at your door.
Just in context with the last question, would it be swag mesh?
I thought that.
Oh gosh. Cool. Well, anything else on top of mind for either of you? Any last questions, of course? Anyone want to send in a couple questions? We got a little bit more time here, but Patrick, Adam, anything else you want to bring to the table?
The big thing I want to impress on people, and this is when we talk to customers, it's all about understand the best practices, educate yourself about best practices. That's where you're going to get the best experience from a deployment perspective and usage. So when we think about like Power BI best practices and Synapse, go back to what I said earlier, right? Think about the best features from both ends and bring those together for a good implementation and deployment.
In addition to that, if you're following those best practices, you are future-proofing. You're helping to future-proof what you're deploying out, because you may start with a small database today. You may start with a very small amount of data, and if you don't adopt best practices like a star schema and you work with this flat table, as that model grows, as things change, and you continue to add columns, it's not going to scale. It's just absolutely not going to scale. But if you think, hey, you adopt the mindset of, I'm going to follow all these best practices that Adam talked about from a security, from a modeling perspective, everything that he spewed out for like when he was writing these dissertations literally on the screen. If you think about all of these things he was saying, and you start, adopting them, and when you deploy these things out, right, it scales. It continues to grow with you. Your model's there, and everything will just hopefully continue to work, but most importantly, perform, right? So,
and as we're all talking about community here too, share those best practices. When you discover something as worked really well, or you got an aha moment, post it with that Synapse influencers.
So I'm going to bring up one more thing on that point too. Yeah. When we think about community, or we think about best practices, when we think about community, I think a lot of people's natural instinct is external community. But I also want to really impress you on internal community. So when you think about deploying Power BI and Synapse and data and really whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, think about your internal community and how do you build that up? How do you find the champions in your organization that can push those best practices, that can push the learnings back into the folks that are just getting started with it, and to help each other grow? That's how we've seen all of these large adoptions of Power BI. They happen because they have an internal community of those champions that are helping to support themselves internally, whether it's DAX, whether it's SQL, whether it's, whatever it is. Like, how do we actually implement that, and sharing those things within those? So one thing I'll point you to, I asked to drop this in the chat, is we have a doc out on the Power BI guidance called the Power BI Adoption Roadmap. Right now, I think a lot of this applies to Synapse as well. This is not unique to Power BI. Some of these are concepts. There are some Power BI specific things in there as well, but you can take these. Some of it's about making sure you have an executive sponsor, making sure that you're identifying those champions and building those in, making sure you have a learn or content strategy for how do people go find these things internally. I see a lot of customers building up internal portals with links for beginners, intermediate, advanced, and where do you go to get this information? Having internal like office hour type sessions where people can come together and talk about that. Having some internal space where people can go ask questions. There's a lot of collaboration tools out there, but when you use Teams, have a team set up where people can go and ask those questions. Right? So those are all things that bring that internal community together. And you can go out and leverage the external community as well, bring those resources in, but absolutely pay attention to that.
I think it's a great point you bring up. And also I always hear, when you showing that fancy new dashboard to the leadership team and they're all oohing and ahhing, make sure they know what was behind that you had to connect to Synapse. You had to bring in all this data from all these other places.
These are the Legos.
It's not just the end of the pipeline. It's all the stuff that's upstream from
Yeah,
there.
that's hilarious. That's great.
Cool. So we're coming up on the hour. Thanks to Adam and Patrick and everyone who participated today in the session. Hope you all learned something new. Tell us what you think. We dropped a short survey into the chat window, so please take just a minute to let us know, and let us know what topics you want to cover in the future. Registration for the next event should be open now or very soon. Please visit the website, which is aka.ms/synapseinfluencers, or keep an eye on our Twitter post for an announcement when that goes live. And on August 17th, we'll have members of the Synapse engineering team, and we'll be discussing data estate modernization with Azure Synapse and maybe even data mesh. If you haven't already, I'm sure everyone is following at Azure_Synapse and then tagging your posts with Synapse influencers and Azure Synapse so that other community members can easily find your content. If you have any questions related to the program at any time, you can reach me and Terrence and others at synapseinfluencers@microsoft.com. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you again on August 17th. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you.